Fear. It's something we all know, right? It's just a universal human experience. And for literally thousands of years, when people have felt afraid, they've turned to this one piece of ancient poetry for some serious comfort and courage Psalm 91. So, in this explainer, we're going to break down why this powerful text has been such a go to response to fear for everything from ancient plagues to our own modern anxieties. Let's dive in and explore the architecture of this ancient fortress for the soul. First things first. To really get the promise, we have to understand the problems it was written to solve. The world this psalm came from was filled with some very real dangers. The kind you could see, and maybe more importantly, the kind you couldn't. The poem just gets right to the heart of our most primal fears. It speaks directly to the terror by night. And this isn't just about things that go bump in the dark. It's really about that feeling of vulnerability when we're alone, those anxieties that just creep in when all the distractions of the day finally fade away. And it doesn't stop there with just our personal fears. The psalm also takes on these huge, widespread, and visible threats, what it calls the pestilence that walketh in darkness. That's the language of plagues, of diseases that could just sweep through a community and create mass panic, a feeling of total powerlessness. And that's a fear our world has come to know all too well, hasn't it? So you can see this psalm is being incredibly realistic. It's not pretending danger doesn't exist. It acknowledges the arrows flying by day and the destruction at noon. It paints this picture of a pretty chaotic world, which, of course, leads to this really fundamental human question. Is there any real safety to be found anywhere? The psalm asks this question before it gives its profound answer. Okay, so after laying out the reality of danger, the psalmist makes this incredible pivot. It shifts from all the problems we face to a series of really radical promises about divine protection. It starts to build this case for a kind of safety that isn't dependent on our circumstances at all. It all kicks off with this really powerful personal declaration. The speaker uses the language of military defense, a refuge, a fortress. Just picture that. These are images of these massive, impenetrable stone walls, of a secure stronghold that no enemy can breach. It's a very active statement of where they're choosing to place their trust. And then the imagery just completely shifts. It's amazing. We go from the cold, hard stone of a fortress to something incredibly tender and personal, the feathers and wings of a mother bird. So this isn't just about safety from an enemy anymore. It's about this intimate, nurturing care you'd get from a protective parent. Now here, the poet uses what's known as hyperbole, intentional exaggeration, to make a really powerful point. This dramatic picture of thousands falling, it's not necessarily a literal promise that you'll never stub your toe. Instead, what it's doing is it's dramatically contrasting the sheer scale of the chaos all around with the profound security of the one who is protected. So you see, the psalm doesn't just give us one idea of safety. It builds this rich, multi-layered picture of what divine protection looks like. It uses a whole arsenal of metaphors, a refuge, a shadow from the sun, a shield for battle, and even angels as guardians, to communicate this sense of complete and total care. But here's the key, and this is so important. These incredible promises, they aren't a blank check. They aren't something you can just claim without any context. No, they're rooted in a much, much deeper concept that really unlocks the entire meaning of the poem. The very first verse says, "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High." That word dwell, that's everything. It doesn't mean you just visit God when you're in trouble like it's an emergency room. It implies a continuous, habitual, intimate relationship, like making God your home, your actual habitation. The security that's described as a byproduct of being that close. And you have to pay close attention to the structure here, because the poem actually does something really clever. It shifts its point of view. For the first 13 verses, it's the believer speaking, right? They're declaring their trust. But then, in the final 3 verses, the voice changes. God himself speaks, responding directly to that declaration of love and trust. And this contrast gets right to the core message, the promise of being delivered. It's not some transactional bargain, It's not like putting a coin in a vending machine to get a prize. No, it's presented as the natural outcome of a real covenantal relationship. God's response flows directly from the believer's love and loyalty. It really is all about relationship. Okay, so that's the theology behind it. But how does this ancient poem about pestilence and arrows and lions, how does that speak to our modern world of stock markets and social media anxiety and, global pandemics? Well, the applications are incredibly relevant. For anxiety, it's a tool to reorient our minds away from our fears and onto God's presence. In times of illness, it encourages a trust that works alongside, not against, medicine and common sense. When you're facing job insecurity, it helps you reframe your identity in something way more stable than a paycheck. And in global crises, it provides a solid foundation for courage and for compassion. But there is one final, absolutely crucial piece to understanding this psalm. To really grasp its true meaning, we actually have to look at how it has been famously misused. And this provides an essential guardrail for applying it the right way. So in the New Testament, the devil actually quotes Psalm 91 to Jesus. He specifically uses the part about angels catching him to try and tempt him into jumping from the temple. The logic was basically, hey, if this promise is true, prove it, force God's hand. And Jesus' refusal is just a masterclass in how we're supposed to understand this text. This all comes down to a really critical distinction. Psalm 91 is a source of profound comfort. It's a call to a deep relational trust. It's a promise of God's presence with us in the middle of trouble. What it is not is a magic spell for physical immunity, or a license to be reckless, or some kind of formula to manipulate God into doing what we want. Real trust doesn't put God to the test. And that really leaves us with the central challenge of this psalm. It invites us into this place of incredible peace and security, even in a chaotic world. So the question for us to think about is, how do we live in that comfort? How do we truly dwell in that secret place without crossing the line into a dangerous presumption that just treats God's promise like a tool for our own will?